We have been talking about leveraging outsourcing for profit, but how do you know when to outsource or if you even should outsource? Is it actually the right choice for your firm and your needs? So, the first thing we're going to look at is the definition of a business, because a business does not consist of a single person all by themselves. That is not a business, that is self-employment. Now, don't get me wrong, that could be very fulfilling and happy self-employment. There's nothing wrong with self-employment. If you are happy working by yourself without a team and you are making money and you're still able to take time off and go on holiday and have a full and happy life, that is fantastic. You do not have to build a business. But if you are trying to build a full-scale accounting firm that you one day dream of retiring from or selling, that cannot consist of only you. And if you are self-employed, but you're finding yourself overwhelmed by your workload, you're not bringing in enough to pay yourself a decent salary, and you never get to go on holiday, that is crippling self-employment and it's not worth living through. You had a better life working for someone else. So if you want to build a business or improve the self-employment that you're in, you need to build a team. But there are multiple ways to build a team. Three main ways which we are going to look at today. The first one is the one we are all familiar with, and that is hiring. You offer someone a set amount of money in order for them to devote their time to getting specific outcomes for you on a daily and monthly basis. We understand hiring. We have all experienced it in some form. But there is also outsourcing and offshoring. So outsourcing involves leveraging someone else's resources to get a job done. And offshoring involves recruiting your own resources, like hiring, but that resource is sitting in another country. So, which one should you employ for your firm? Well, that depends on your firm and what you need done within it. So to make the right decision, it helps to understand the pros and cons of each option before you can make the right call. Let's start by looking at the pros and cons of hiring. The biggest and most obvious reason to hire is the exclusivity involved. When you hire an employee, you have the right to use their time for the full 7 hours per day, Monday to Friday. And while they might have been hired for a specific role, you also have the right to request their assistance with jobs outside of that role within reason, which means that you have the ability to truly maximize your return on investment and you have full control of the process and quality. You choose working hours, you choose workload, deadlines, timelines. You dictate what is good and bad performance. You decide whether they work in office or from home. You have complete control. That control and the dedication enables strong cultural alignment and easier collaboration and accountability. It allows the business to build institutional knowledge, which is why we like hiring. However, there are some negatives to hiring. So while some countries allow, or most countries, I should say, allow for a probationary period, your employees know what that period is, and they tend to be on their best performance during probation. And then once the probation is over, depending on the country you are in and your local labor laws, it can be very hard to get rid of a non-performing employee. I know it is difficult in the UK and it is nearly impossible in South Africa. So you run the risk of having a problem that you can't solve down the line. Secondly, you have to pay an employee a full salary, whether you have work for them or not. If you can't fill up their hours Monday to Friday, they still get their full pay. If you have a slow period or you lose a client or you battle to collect payment, that is your problem, not the employees. They get their pay. And then there is the admin involved. If you become an employer, then there are employment regulations you need to abide by. You have to obey your local labor laws, and some of those can be a bit onerous, particularly in the area of performance management and disciplinary actions. But you also have the responsibility of pay slips and statutory submissions. Hiring can be very expensive. I know we already mentioned having to work full-time and pay for full-time regardless of the work, but top talent can require high salaries that you might not be able to afford. And then even if the salaries are reasonable, your employees still cost more because you have to pay for their equipment and their furniture and their space and their tools and all of those things. And generally speaking, hiring involves locality. You're going to hire in your area. Now that can actually be a pro because you can get someone who understands the local environment and the local economy, but it also means you are restricted to the talent available in your area, which can affect your scalability and can result in skills gaps, which is happening in the accounting industry at the moment. We are facing, I should say, quite a big skills shortage. I want to take this opportunity to also mention an extremely common mistake that firm owners make when it comes to hiring. I know this because I did it and I've seen many firm owners do it. Is most firm owners hire out of desperation. You see, you start your firm and it grows and you're excited about the growth, but that growth comes with unexpected extra burdens. More clients mean more income. That's amazing. They also mean more admin. So you can grow right through excitement into overwhelm extremely quickly. And when you suddenly realize that you can't keep all the balls in the air anymore, it is normally at that point that we try to hire help. The problem is that if you hire when you are desperate, you do not hire properly. We are going to do an entire series on hiring, so I'm not going to go deep into this point here, but I want you to recognize that hiring in desperation very rarely ends well. When we hire out of desperation instead of planning the process, we end up with employees who interviewed well, but don't perform. Or we end up with trainees who take up all of our time, or we end up spending all of our time on micromanaging instead of running the business the way that we were hoping we could. So if you do go the route of hiring, please keep an eye out for our series on how to hire well. I promise you it will be worth your while. We've looked at the pros and cons of hiring. Let's have a look at the benefits and issues with offshoring, because offshoring is almost the same as hiring. It's essentially the act of hiring an employee, but through a third party in another country. And because of this, the benefits are similar. You get to control working hours, workload, deadlines, performance, and expectation. You determine workloads and outcomes. The difference between offshoring and hiring is a big benefit of offshoring. It is the fact that the admin falls away. It is the problem of the third party you are using to keep the regulations in place. So you don't have to worry about statutory submissions or any other issues with the regulations of hiring. That is no longer your problem. The issue of locality disappears entirely. You have access to a global talent pool. And generally speaking, there is potential for cost saving, especially if your local currency is stronger than the currency of your offshore provider, because the chances are very high that an amount that seems low for you or normal for you is actually extremely lucrative for them. So you have the possibility of getting top talent at extremely reasonable rates. but there are still negatives. The first is that while the statutory burden has fallen away, the majority of the admin falls to your third party, but you have to handle performance management, possibly still disciplinary actions. That depends on your offshore provider. They might do disciplinary actions for you, but this is your team member, even if they're being paid through a third party. So you need to manage their workload and their performance. Cost of equipment and tools still remains your responsibility, and you still have to pay a full salary regardless of your cash flow or workload. You are basically hiring, your new hired employee just sits somewhere else. The most important negative to consider before doing offshoring is that it involves remote work, and not all firms are set up to make remote work work. That's why we did an entire series on it. If you haven't watched it yet and you are considering offshoring, please go watch our series on making sure you are remote ready, because that is a very important consideration, and especially when it comes to cybersecurity. So a productive remote working arrangement involves a lot more than just giving your new team member a laptop. You need the right software, the right tools, the right management, the right systems. You need a way to build connection and rapport. So please do go watch our series on that. And then you might not consider it a negative after all. And then lastly, we're looking at outsourcing. Obviously, we are looking at this as part of our outsourcing series. So outsourcing involves making the work someone else's problem, which means it has a completely different list of pros and cons from hiring and offshoring. Now, most of them you should already know, because if you've made it this far into our YouTube series, you've already watched the webinar that went through the benefits of outsourcing. Outsourcing is cost effective because not only are you paying for the work you need done, you are not responsible for peripherals like equipment or upskilling or tools. That is the outsource provider's problem. Outsourcing can also be done in pieces. If you only need 1 hour of work per month, you ask for 1 hour. If you need 1 hour per day, you ask for 1 hour per day. You do not have to pay for a full month or a full week. Now, because of this, you have access to specialized expertise. So you could, for example, hire a marketing strategist to assist you for 1 day per month for the same cost as getting a teenager to manage your social media for you. So you're going to get better expertise and skills for a lower price or the same price. Outsourcing also completely removes the administrative burden. You are not in any way responsible for statutory submissions or performance management and disciplinary actions. You are paying for results and you can demand them. The biggest benefit of outsourcing is being a client instead of a boss, because a client will always receive better service than a boss does. It also vastly improves your ability to scale. But there are still negatives to outsourcing. If the work grows, outsourcing a full-time solution is going to cost you more than hiring. And while you don't have to worry about the administrative and regulatory burdens, you have zero control over the team member and their work. You can set deadlines and you can specify outcomes, but the work itself is at the prerogative of the outsource provider. Perhaps the most frustrating negative is that you cannot necessarily control who you work with. So for example, if you outsource bookkeeping to most Asian outsource providers, they will get your bookkeeping done every month, normally quite well, and normally for an extremely reasonable fee. But they also very rarely allocate a specific bookkeeper. They use a pool of bookkeepers and accountants. So your work is hardly ever done by the same person, and you may find yourself having to give the exact same feedback every month, and you might battle with communication. Another issue in terms of communication is that outsourcing comes with time zone differences. So if you outsource to someone local, that isn't an issue. And that is obviously an option as well. You can use a local provider. But if you are in the UK and you decide to outsource to a company in the Philippines, you may very literally need to wait a whole day for your team members to come back to you because of the time zone differences. Now, technically, that applies to offshoring as well, except that in an offshoring arrangement, you can dictate the working hours. So you can have it so that your offshore team member works your working hours, even though those might be nighttime or early morning for them. You cannot do this for an outsourcing arrangement. So these are the pros and cons, and they lead us to finally getting the answer to the question posed at the beginning of the video. When is it right for you to outsource? So outsourcing is a good option when you need a part-time solution and you don't have time to spend on training. Outsourcing works best if you use it to get rid of your non-core tasks, your administrative and your operational tasks. If you get rid of those so that you can focus on your core money-making duties, that is the best use of outsourcing in a small accounting firm. You can outsource your money-making tasks as well, but then you want to do it in small bursts to handle overflow or growth or busy periods. As an accounting firm, really good uses of outsourcing could involve outsourcing social media management, using the services of a virtual assistant, collaborating with other professionals offering specialized services, things that you'd like to offer but you don't want to handle yourself, like payroll or tax consulting, using the services of an outsourced bookkeeper to assist with getting lots of small accounts up to date. So especially those shoebox customers that come to you once a year with an entire pile of receipts and you've got to capture 12 months of work, outsourcing is a really good way to get that bookkeeping done so that you can focus on the reporting and the tax submissions. Or you could employ the services of a cleaning company once or twice a week instead of hiring a cleaner, or you could use a phone answering service instead of getting a receptionist. So however you set up your outsourcing, whether it is an administrative or operational, or if you do decide that you want to give away your lower level core tasks like bookkeeping, if you find yourself using the outsourced solution more and more and more to the point that they are essentially helping you full time, then you might want to reconsider hiring, because you will pay far less to an employee than you will to an outsourced provider when you're looking at 160 hours per month. Okay. But we looked at the pros and cons of hiring. The biggest con is the regulatory requirements. So if you hire employees, you have a lot of admin to do for them and for your local tax authority. Now you can again hire someone or outsource to someone to take care of this for you. So you can outsource payroll and HR. So hating regulatory admin is not necessarily a reason to avoid hiring. You can hire your core team, outsource your payroll and HR. That will also work really well. But another con when it comes to direct hiring is that sometimes the talent you need is not in your country. So our profession at the moment is facing a skills shortage. That shortage is being felt the most in the UK, the US, and Australia. There are parts of the world where they have lots of accountants, well-skilled, well-talented, well-educated. So maybe the employee salaries you can afford in your local area do not match the expertise level that you need. And in that case, you can offshore instead. Or if you really hate payroll admin, you can consider offshoring instead of hiring. because the biggest benefit of offshoring is the access you get to a much wider talent pool across the globe. And then there are also lower costs and less admin. There are, of course, disadvantages, but these disadvantages can be dealt with, and a good offshoring solution provider will make most of them their problem, not yours. Hopefully that answered the question for you as to whether or not you should be outsourcing in your firm. If hiring or offshoring is of interest to you, please book a call with me. Human Edge primarily offers recruitment and offshoring services, although we do offer outsourcing as well. And if you're still unsure which of these options is best for you, then come book a virtual call with me and we can discuss where your firm is right now, what you are facing, and what the best way forward for you could be. I am more than happy to help you find your path. I promise I won't force our services on you. I want you to find the best way forward for you.